so in this penultimate episode of this series, I'm rounding up and having a look at the last of the villains in my collection. And I'm pleased to say that I've left a couple of the best to last. And as we're coming to the end of the series, I thought it might be worth just refreshing people's memories as to what the packaging looked like for pretty much every figure in this line. They were essentially very simple. We had the Batman the Animated Series image on the back of the card, and then of course it was a plastic clamshell case which showed the figure in all its glory with the name of the character and the number of the character, or the number of the release, in the bottom corner there. Meanwhile, the reverse is very uninspiring. It is again just replicating that Batman the Animated Series logo, except the colours are inverted. It's a nice design, but it's a shame they didn't utilise this space a bit more to advertise maybe some of the figures in this line. Because as we've seen already, this is quite an expansive line. But if nothing else, we can say that the collection is uniform, and all in all, is quite displayable. So we'll start off by looking at the Ra's al Ghul, or Ra's al Ghul. As you can see, he is presented here in his cape. This is quite a striking visual, and he's very nicely presented. This looks really good. Now, Ra's has a couple of different looks throughout the animated series. I'd say that this one here with the green cape and the green suit is probably his most predominant look throughout the series, but instead they've opted for this costume, and this is more his fighting garb, which I think probably is the right choice. And I think they've done a pretty good job of bringing this to life. Now, something I should point out is that this cape is a very hard plastic. There is no flexibility, there's no malleability to this cape whatsoever. And so as a consequence, it does mean you have to remove the cape if you want to put him in any kind of dynamic pose, at least when it involves the arms. But that's quite cool, because when you remove the cape, you actually get a second look for this character, which is pretty cool. So, in terms of his articulation, he does have the ball jointed head, which means he can spin his head from side to side, move it up and down, really good distance here, which is great. He's got the ball jointed shoulders, and again, those arms come out a fair distance there. Likewise, the elbow there is hinged at 90 degrees, but also it can rotate all the way around. Now, he doesn't have a wrist swivel, but he does have a swivel at the lower arm, which is great. He's also got a swivel at the waist. He's got those hinge hips, which we know and love, but although to be fair, they don't look bad here at all. And those legs can kick forwards a little bit, not a huge amount, but they can go all the way back, which is crazy. He has single jointed knees, and he also has a swivel at the boot as well, at the boot cut, which is really good. And he's also got a pivot at the ankle there, meaning of course it just hinges up and down. But sadly, he is surprisingly light on accessories. Sure, he has his turnaround stand, he has this fantastic alternate demon's head, he has an extra pair of closed fists, and another pair of open hands. And here he is with the alternate head, which is really cool because it goes over the top of the cape there, which looks really good. And a nice little detail is that when you turn it to the side, you can actually see they've actually bothered to mould in the lower part of the face underneath the mask. So I think this is really cool. Now, sadly, there's no articulation, but it's a great look. Moving on now to Talia Al Ghul, the demon's daughter. Straight away you'll probably notice that I've had to use the stand here because she won't stand by herself. She does have those really small feet which make her impractical to stand on her own, I'm afraid. But once again, the sculpt is really nice, and you might be wondering about that hairpiece there because it goes over her eyeball. Actually, they have bothered to sculpt in and paint all those details, and the hair is thankfully flexible so that you can peel it up to have a look if you want. I think they've done a pretty fantastic job with this sculpt, and once again, this looks like a brand new mould. This isn't just Catwoman recycled, this is new, as virtually every character in this line is a unique mould. As for articulation, well, she doesn't do too badly, but obviously that hair is always going to be a factor. Now, it is malleable, so there is a little bit of give with it, but obviously the more you turn it to the side, the more it is going to force her head down. Speaking of which, she can move her head up and down a little bit, not a huge range. Again, the hair does stop the head from tilting back a great deal, but there is enough. She does have the border into shoulders. She also has that pin swivel that we see at the elbow there as well, which bends to 90 degrees, and she's got two swivels here, one at the top of the glove and then one at the wrist, and of course the wrist also hinges, so she's doing quite well for articulation at this point. Sadly, there is nothing in the waist, there's no ab crunch, there's no waist swivel, it just is a solid piece. Once again, she does have those hinge hips, of course they kick all the way out there. Obviously, this isn't a great joint because it looks pretty unsightly, and it's the worst on the female characters, I think. But she can kick her legs forward and backwards, not a huge distance in truth, but enough to be serviceable certainly. She's got that single jointed knee, but sadly nothing at the boot. I was pretty convinced that this would swivel, but despite my best efforts, no it doesn't, which is odd. But she does, however, have a hinge at the foot there. And like father, like daughter, Talia's quite light on accessories. She has a turnaround stand, she has a pistol, she's also got a couple of variations on open and her closed hands. One of the big issues I have with this figure is the pistol. It doesn't really fit into a hand very well. Like, it goes in, it fits nice and tight and snug, but it looks really odd. It's fine down by her side, but when you put it in her hand as if she's trying to point it, it's always sloping down, so it looks really weird. No matter what position you put it in, it just doesn't look good. Now, next up we have one of my favourites in this whole line. I just think this is such a fantastic figure. But once again, you'll probably notice he needs a stand in order to support him. Now, he can stand alright, but if there's any kind of movement, he's going to wobble and fall down. Now, Ventriloquist has some pretty decent articulation. His head moves from side to side, it looks up and down, and yeah, there's a pretty good range of motion here, so I'm really pleased with this. He has the ball jointed shoulders, so his arms can't kick out to the sides. They're a little bit stiff, and obviously you won't want to do it too much because it does compromise the look of the suit. It's got the pin and swivel for the elbow there, which again bends to 90 degrees, which looks pretty decent. And he's got the swivel and hinge at the wrist as well. And although you can't see it, he does have a swivel at the waist. He's also got the hinged hips, which, yeah, even here don't look too great, to be honest. And of course they are restricted a little bit by that blazer. Likewise, kicking the legs forwards and back, not a lot of give here at all. His knees do hinge, but again, not a huge distance here because they're so low down, so yeah. Likewise, his feet, they only go from side to side. They swivel, but they don't arch up and down. But of course, the star of the show, as we all know, is Scarface. And this is absolutely fantastic. It's a great sculpt. I love that he's got that rubber outfit on top there. It looks really nicely textured, and he's even got articulation. He has ball jointed shoulders which allow his arms to swing up and out to the side, and he's even got a swivel at the wrist as well. Of course, his head can move from side to side, and also his legs kick up and down. So this is fantastic. This is quite unexpected. I thought if we were going to get Scarface it would just be a single solid piece, but this is just taking it to another level. And even better, on his back you'll notice there's this little gap here, this little nodule that you push it up and down. That makes his head move up and down like a proper ventriloquist dummy, and I think this is just fantastic. And in his back, because it is a soft rubber, there is a space there for you to slide in Ventriloquist's hand so that he can hold Scarface perfectly. And as if that wasn't enough, he also comes with a good supply of accessories as well, including his turnaround stand, Scarface's Tommy gun, and a couple of different pairs of hands, some closed and some open. So overall, Ventriloquist and Scarface may not be your favourite Batman villain, but wow, they make a fantastic toy. And yeah, I love what they've done here. I think they've just caught this perfectly. Definitely one of the treats of this line. Next up we have Poison Ivy, and she was from one of the latter waves of this collection, and there'd been a little bit of a break in between, as it seems like for whatever reason the line was dying and slowing to a crawl really, and these figures became increasingly more difficult to get hold of. It's odd to me that they left some of the most famous or most loved characters to the very end. And it almost looked like we were never going to get some of these characters, so I was really lucky to get hold of Poison Ivy, because she was really blink and you miss her, and she was gone. She was really hard to pick up. But I have to be honest, she's probably not one of the best. Now, there's some lovely little features like her wrist crossbow, which is really nicely done. But I have to be honest, there's something about the sculpt which isn't quite right. In fact, it's not the sculpt, I think it's the head. I think the head is just too big. And part of that might be the hair, so she's got a very hard plastic for her hair, which definitely impinges on the articulation here, because she's always permanently looking down, she can't really look up with it, and she can't really move her head from side to side too much either, so it's just not quite right, and I think her head just looks a little bit too big for her body as well. And whilst we're talking about articulation, as we've talked about here, her head, of course, is a real issue. She does have that ball-jointed neck, so she should be able to look up and down, but that hair really is a hindrance. Now, she does have the ball-jointed shoulders, and as you can see, there's no problems getting them up and to the side here. She's also got that pin and swivel at the elbow there, allowing the arm to rotate all the way around, and of course hinge at 90 degrees, which is great. And her wrist, of course, swivels all the way around, and arches upwards and downwards as well on that hinge there, which is fantastic. But she also has some extra articulation at the gauntlet there, the top of her glove, that actually swivels, so there's a little bit extra here, which is quite nice. As with most of the female characters, of course, there is no ab crunch, there is no swivel at the waist, but she does have the hinge hips, which, don't look fantastic when they kick them out to the side, but it is there if you want it. And of course, she can also kick her legs forwards and back as well, which is a pretty healthy distance. She's got that single jointed knee, and she's got the hinge at the foot there. And then in terms of accessories, something kind of weird happens with these couple of waves, where they don't seem to have put as much effort in, really. For example, there is no turnaround stand, but she does come with that plant pop, which is kind of cool, I quite like this, and then she just comes loaded with a lot of extra hands, which is kind of weird. A lot of these hands are very, very similar, so it feels a little bit like overkill, when I would have much rather just had another cool accessory. Poison Ivy is definitely an odd one in this collection. As I said, I'm not feeling the likeness, to be honest. I think that the head is just too big, and that might be down to the hair, but I think also something in the face. Likewise, I'm not quite sure what happened. Why no turnaround stand, and why so many hands, and not another cool, unique, character-defining accessory? Okay, and now finally for today we move on to Mr. Freeze. Now Mr. Freeze came out the same wave as Poison Ivy, but he is light years apart. He's one of my absolute favourites in this whole collection. I think he's up there as one of the very best. For a start, he has nice, big, sturdy feet there, so he's got a fantastic mould, he holds himself perfectly, and you don't need to worry about having a stand with this guy, which is great. There's a few more little details with Mr. Freeze that you don't get with some of the other characters because of their simplistic design. But wow, yes, he comes with his oxygen tank, which just looks fantastic. And he's got all those rings and ruffles going through his sleeves, which are great. And the ones at the elbow and the ones at the wrist are actually a rubber. And these are fantastic because they work really well with the articulation because they just cover the joints so that it never looks unseemly. It doesn't look, much like a toy in truth. You can't see that joint. Whilst at the same time it doesn't hinder the articulation at all because it just supports it, which is brilliant. And I like that they've got those circular discs just on his belly there, which is fantastic, really completes the look. And in case you're wondering, yes, the helmet does come off, of course, so you can't move the head. It is articulated, and that's how you do it. You just pop it back on, and this just looks brilliant. I think they've done a fantastic job of this. So how does he fare in terms of the rest of his articulation? Well, as we said, he does have the ball jointed neck there, and the joint is at the bottom of the neck, which is great. So of course he can turn his head all the way around, and he can kind of arch it, lean it from side to side. He can't really look up and down too much, but that's fine. It wouldn't work too well with that dome anyway. He's got the ball jointed shoulders, and as you can see, they can stretch all the way out there, which is great. And of course, he's got that pin swivel at the elbow, which is nicely disguised by the rubber bands there, which is brilliant. And of course, he's got the swivel at the wrist, and of course the hinge there as well, which is great. Sadly, there is no waist swivel, so he can't move from side to side. He does have the hinge hips, however. Of course, they kick out all the way to the side there. I don't think this looks too bad on Mr. Freeze, actually, to be fair. Of course, they can kick forwards, but not an awful lot. Surprisingly not, to be honest. They kick a lot more back than they do forwards, but again, not too bad. He does have the single jointed knee, which is fine, and he's got a swivel at the boot there, which is really good. Now, his feet do arch back a little bit, but not a lot, because you'll see it's quite an odd, chunky little joint, that one. Now, they click forwards nicely, but they don't really go back very far. Like Poison Ivy, he's a bit light on accessories. However, he does come with everything I'd want, including his freeze gun, of course, and then another bucket loads of extra hands. Like I said, there's not much variation in these, like the closed fist again, the open hands, but there's a lot of variation on just slightly open, which I don't quite understand, to be honest. So again, just like with Poison Ivy, it just kind of feels like they've given up at this point. They just thought, no turnaround stand, what's the bare minimum? Let's just fill it up with hands. I'm not knocking it, it's great to have all these extra hands, but it does seem a little bit odd. But despite this, I do think this is an absolute fantastic figure. Like I said, he's one of my personal favourites, if not my absolute favourite in this whole line. I'm a bit biased because I do love Mr. Freeze as a character anyway, but I think his design is fantastic. I think they've really caught him perfectly here. He's really authentic, and I just think they've done a fantastic job of bringing him to life. So I love this guy to bits. So there you have it. Overall, I think this is a pretty mixed bag. Certainly, I think Mr. Freeze and Ventriloquist are probably two of my favourites in this collection, just because they're so cool. I think they're fantastic toys, and I think they've done a really nice job of these. Definitely there's some issues when it comes to Talia, and likewise Poison Ivy as well, which is a little bit disappointing. But overall, I think this is a nice set of figures. I think if you've already gone deep on this line and bought the others, you're going to want these, certainly. You're going to want some of these. So yeah, I definitely recommend them. Okay, now join me next week as I take a look at all the other figures in this line that I didn't pick up or didn't get a chance to pick up because they were so scarce, and I'll also take a look at the future as well. What's coming? What's been promised? Because this line isn't quite dead yet. There's still a ray of hope, a spark of hope on the horizon. So I'll take a look at some of those announcements as well. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.